Hi, and welcome to the Vet Story Podcast, home to the most outrageous stories told in vet med. It's raw, it's unfiltered, unscripted, unedited, just raw, off-the-cuff stories. I'm your host, Reece Generelli, and if you're in the vet med space in any capacity, and you have a story like this, I want to hear it. So get ready to have a laugh, eyes on the road if you're driving, or close the doors to your office. Sit back and enjoy the show. Hello, and we are back with another episode of the Vet Story Podcast. I'm joined with John Graham. Now, this one is a little bit unique. John is not in the vet industry. However, he has a wonderful, adventurous story, as I guess share some wisdom upon us all. John, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Reece. Yes, and you're right. I'm not a veterinarian at all. But
tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Oh boy. Well, my bumper sticker is basically that I'm lucky to be alive at age 82. The whole first half of my life was a series of wild-ass adventures that were more and more dangerous, either climbing big, scary mountains or dodging bullets in wars and revolutions for the U.S. Foreign Service or whatever. And I kept walking away from all of them. And so every time I had a near miss, I figured I was indestructible. Now, a lot of young men, of course, feel that they're indestructible, but this continued into my 30s. I mean, I was like really hooked. I was really an adrenaline junkie. It all started, just very briefly, it all started with a weird adventure when I was just 17 years old. I grew up in a very, very placid, calm place, Tacoma, Washington, and a very placid, calm family, loving family, but nothing ever happened in my community. Nothing ever happened in my family. Everybody just sort of just would live their lives by the books. And I found myself at 17, long story short, but I won't tell it, as a member of the crew of a freighter, a ship, big ship going from the U.S. to a summer in the Far East. And I was, like I say, 17 years old, and from this totally placid community, and never having done anything adventuresome in my life. And the seamen, this is way before container ships, of course. So these big ships were run by 50 or 60 really big, tough guys, right? And they took one look at this spindly kid from this placid little town, and they said, "Oh boy, we got some life lessons to teach you, kid." I won't go into it, but they sure taught me those life lessons in that summer at sea. And you can imagine what they were, from barroom brawls to whatever. And it totally changed my life. It completely opened myself to a world that was colorful and dangerous and exciting. And it was completely different from Tacoma, Washington. And my life was totally changed by that trip, and also by those men. I mean, they were amazing. I grew a lot as a kid, and I loved my father, but he was a very, very placid guy, and he never fought back. He was constantly being shoved around by other males at work or whatever, and I hated that. I wanted a role model. I needed someone tough, because I figured I wasn't tough, being kicked around by bullies, and all of a sudden I was on this ship with 50 or 60 of these tough guys. The very first night out from San Francisco, or out in the Pacific, in an evening after dinner, a crewman comes up to me and starts making, sexual advances out on the deck, and another crewman.
Oh, really? Wow.
Well, here I am. I don't know what to do. But this huge black guy named Roy, he must have weighed 250 pounds, built like a football linebacker. He grabs this guy around the throat, shoves him up against the bulkhead, cusses at him, beats him up, kicks him, throws him down on the deck. Oh, man, that's what real men did. I remember going back to my cabin and practicing in front of a mirror, shoving someone up against the wall and cussing at him like Roy did. Yeah, it was something. And life continued like that. The next year, I hitchhiked through the war in Algeria. I was smart enough to put an American flag on my chest so that the rebels wouldn't shoot me as a Frenchman. But there I was in the middle of a war, and it was just like amazing. And all of my heroes from that point on were like John Wayne figures. And I did a lot of other amazing stuff. A year after that, I was with a team that made the first ascent of arguably the most dangerous and difficult climb in North American mountaineering, the north face of Mount McKinley, now Denali in Alaska. I graduated from college and hitchhiked around the world, reporting on wars for the Boston Globe. I mean, it just got more and more adventuresome. And at a certain point, I realized I had to make some money because I wasn't to continue my adventuring. So I joined the U.S. Foreign Service, and they accepted me and kept sending me to dangerous places. I was, for example, in the middle of the revolution in Libya. And it was remarkable because here I was in the middle of my first revolution. There others followed. And there were like cars burning in the streets and mobs throwing rocks, and everybody else at the embassy was freaking out, but not me. I mean, this is the kind of life I loved. I loved angry mobs and cars burning in the streets and bullets whistling by my ear. So I asked the State Department then to send me to the most dangerous assignment they had in Vietnam during the war. And they obliged. I became the advisor to the city of Hue in what was then the northern part of South Vietnam, just 50 miles short of the DMZ, the demarcation line between what was then North and South Vietnam. It was an incredible dangerous place to be in, especially since American troops were then withdrawn under the withdrawal agreements. There's just a couple of us civilians basically surrounded by the North Vietnamese army. And, that was the whole first half of my life. Something happened in the War of Vietnam, though, that changed it.
Okay.
I'm going to stop there because I've been, you ask me a question or something, or I'll continue, but whatever.
No, continue. This is great.
Well, I'll tell you, Reese, what happened was here I was in Vietnam. I thought the war was stupid. I knew it was unwinnable. I could see for myself the U.S. was getting its butt kicked over there, also because the South Vietnamese government was so corrupt. None of the people wanted to follow it, so they followed the other side. So we were going to lose that war. It was a stupid war. But more to the point, my home was 8,000 miles away, and I didn't give a shit about who won that war. I was only there for the adventure. I was only there for the adrenaline rush. And then comes this big battle for Hue in April, May 1971, so-called Easter Offensive. And again, I almost get killed. But there's this big battle, and I'm in the middle of it, and suddenly I realize, what the hell am I doing? I mean, I'm no longer a kid. People are living or they're dying because of decisions I'm making. I was a mid-level officer then. And I mean, this is incredibly shallow. How can I let my life become this shallow where the only thing that matters is me? The only thing that matters is satisfying my own needs for adventure, and people are dying because of my thirst for adventure. And all of a sudden, it just hit me that I was becoming an evil person because of this, and I had to get out of this hole. How could I have let my life become that shallow? Well, it turned out that obviously I survived that battle because carrier jets off American warships off the coast, when the weather finally cleared, basically obliterated the North Vietnamese troops attacking the city. And the State Department sent me then back to California to deal with what now we would call PTSD. I mean, I was really messed up. But I was messed up not just because of the usual reasons one gets PTSD from living with danger for so long. I was messed up because of that discovery of how shallow my life had become. And I knew I needed to change. I needed to change. So I did. I went to what were then called encounter groups. This is California, right? In the 60s and 70s. And other people began to point out that maybe I really wasn't John Wayne, that maybe there was a nice guy there. And I began to realize, looking back at my history, all the way back to that time on that ship with Roy and the ship, that what I had done, I was taken like a large piece of heavy plywood, and I nailed it over my heart because it was not what men did. After I saw what Roy did and the people I met in Algeria and others of my then heroes, people like John Wayne, they didn't cry. They weren't women. They were tough guys, and they didn't show their emotions. So that's what I had become. Even though, looking back at my childhood, I realized that I really was a very gentle kid. And all that had been just papered, nailed over with this heavy piece of plywood. And I'd allowed myself to become this toxic masculine. And so I gradually began to learn how to crawl out of that hole, to be a better father to my two kids, to become a member of communities and groups, to begin to care about other people, to begin to care about the tremendous pain I saw out in the third world, the poor nations of Africa and Asia suffering from violence and poverty and disease. I began to care about that. And luckily, the State Department ended up sending me to the United Nations, where I was in charge of American policies toward Africa and much of the third world. And I was able to do a lot of good because by then I'd really turned my life around. And I fought hard for peace and justice issues, so hard that I was almost fired because I was going way further than the U.S. government wanted to go. We had no friends in the third world then. Our only concern was winning the Cold War against the then Soviet Union and making money and whatever. And we just paid lip service to a lot of these concerns that were now completely controlling my life, peace and justice issues in the third world. And I'm happy. I will be proud till the day I die of the fact that of the many things I did at the UN, one of them was helping end apartheid, the system of institutionalized racism in South Africa. And I did it by basically double crossing my own government and setting up a system at the UN that the US did not want. Well, I basically tricked the U.S. into adopting a tough arms embargo on South Africa, which kept gun runners from sending guns and military equipment to the South African military and police, who then used it to kill blacks. And once the embargo was in place and the flow of guns and arms from Europe and the United States was cut off, it greatly weakened the South African whites' ability to continue to oppress their black people. So, and that led to eventually the end of apartheid. So I was a big part of that. So, the second half of my life, I mean, I quit. By the way, I quit the Foreign Service after that because, like I said, the Foreign Service didn't share my ideals. And not only that, even if it did, it was moving too slow. I was then a wild-eyed idealist trying to solve every one of the world's problems, from nuclear missiles in Europe to disease in Malawi. I was there. And I couldn't do it working for anybody else. So I quit the Foreign Service. And I got a job because I was not independently wealthy. I got a job lecturing on a cruise ship heading for the Far East. And all I had to do was give 2 lectures on this cruise ship. It was incredible. I was paid very well. And I got to take my then 13-year-old daughter, Mallory, with me. And damned if that cruise ship, 3 days off from the coast from Vancouver, where you are, I guess, it catches fire and begins to sink. We're 140 miles off the Alaska coast, and a typhoon is bearing down, and the ship is burning and sinking. And we're all put into lifeboats. Now, it was, by today's standards, a small cruise ship, 550 people. They're all put into lifeboats. And the SOS is sounded, and helicopters at dawn begin to fly over the lifeboats, lifting people off one at a time and taking them to an oil tanker that had answered the SOS. So I see my daughter Mallory rescued about noon on the next day. But the typhoon now is coming on. And because we had not been told there had been a fire and to prepare, none of us had warm clothes. And so there were, all of us in the lifeboat were basically suffering from hypothermia. At a certain point, the typhoon is so severe, the helicopters can't fly anymore. Too damn dangerous to fly a helicopter in those conditions. I mean, we're edging toward 30-foot waves. I mean, that's like a 60-foot wall of water. That's something. And the high winds up to 60 knots. And so, like I say, we're dying of hypothermia. But just about everybody has been rescued by the helicopters. But there's 8 of us left in lifeboat number 2, and the helicopter signals that it can't come back. It's just too damn dangerous. They'll crash the helicopter. So the only hope for us is a Coast Guard cutter, a small boat, searching wildly in this storm for us. And chances are 1 in a million that it'll find us. This is a wild storm now with visibility now to maybe down to maybe 100 yards. And so the key thing though is light. Now it's getting dusk on that whole first day in the lifeboat in the middle of the storm. And while the chances of finding us in daylight were dim, the chances of finding us at night were non existent. We had no lights, no flares, no radio, no signal mirrors, nothing. And we were all dying of hypothermia. I could see that because I'd done a lot of mountain climbing. I know how hypothermia kills you. So we'll be dead by morning, 4 or 5 hours anyway. We'll all be dead, if not tossed out of that boat in the middle of a howling typhoon. And so I have this moment. I'm not a religious person, but believe me, when you're stuck in a situation like that, you realize that finally your luck's going to run out and you're going to die in a few hours. Well, you try to pray. You try to make some connection to some higher power if you have any hope of being a higher power. So I do that, and it wasn't any sort of a prayer. I mean, I just looked up into this wild storm, and I said, "Wait a minute, yeah, I know. The first half of my life, I created some damage there. I got that. But at the United Nations, hell, I helped end apartheid. I helped save hundreds of thousands of lives, and my whole life now is oriented towards service, to making the world a better place. And now you're wiping me out, God. You're wiping me out. What? It makes no sense at all. I mean, I went to a Jesuit high school. I know about order in the universe. Like the sugar crystals have this
Yeah.
nice lattice and everything. I know about order in the universe. Well, there's no order in this. I mean, because it's really stupid to wipe me out just as I'm beginning to do some good in the world. Look, and so my prayer becomes this angry bleat. And I start shouting at God, and I hear this voice. Nobody else in the lifeboat hears a damn thing, of course, but I do. And the voice basically says, not in these words, stop bullshitting me and stop bullshitting yourself. You're lecturing on a cruise ship, and it's great. And if you get out of this, you'll lecture on another cruise ship, because the ideals you had begun to show at the United Nations, they're not very strong, and all it takes is running out of money to discourage you from going further. So you got a choice to make. Either you can really commit to your ideals of being a peacemaker, or you can die out here. Your choice. That's what I heard. That is what I heard. And I was beaten. My ego was flattened. And I looked up into this wild storm, and I remember saying, okay, you win. Okay. And in that instant, and I know every single one of our viewers is going to say, oh, no, it couldn't have happened. In that instant, I swear this is the case. The Coast Guard cutter Boutwell comes crashing through this wild storm. If the lookout hadn't seen us, it would have cut our little lifeboat in two. They throw me a rope, and I'm the only one whose hands still work. So I wrap the rope around the cleat, and the next big wave rips the whole side of the boat off. And so frogmen jump into what's left of the lifeboat and pull the rest of us to safety onto the cutter. Came back to New York, never looked back, kept that promise. And very soon after I got back, I found exactly the vehicle to live the rest of my life of service, and it was the Giraffe Heroes Project, which I didn't start, but a remarkable woman I met in New York, Dan Medlock, started the Giraffe Heroes Project, called Giraffe because her mission was to find people sticking their necks out, hence the metaphor. Find people sticking their necks out, and then to tell their stories, and in that way inspire others to be heroic too. I mean, it wasn't a new idea. People have been doing that since Neanderthals were around the campfire, or the troubadours of the Middle Ages. You want people to be heroic, well, you don't preach at them. You tell them the stories of heroes, and that's what Anne was doing. In those days, she was doing it with vinyl records or fax machines, because this was we're talking 1982, 1983, way before the internet. I thought it was kind of lightweight. I thought my wonderful speeches would save the world, and Anne knew better. She knew the power of storytelling. I fall in love with Anne, and we get married, and everything she's doing becomes a lot more important. And it isn't just because I'm madly in love with this woman. It's because I begin to realize that that she's right. There's no greater power than the power of storytelling. So we've been working together on the Giraffe Heroes Project ever since, doing the same thing that was Anne's vision 42 years ago. Finding people sticking their necks out. Now there's like 1,000 of them, I guess, in our database. And we tell their stories, not with fax machines, of course, but with social media for the most part. We've created a program for schools all the way from kindergarten through high school. I've written like 4 books on leadership and citizen action and courage. And so we've been doing that ever since. And now I'm 82, and I look forward to doing it for at least a few more years. So that's the story of my life, and sinking down into the lowest imaginable pit of self-service as an adrenaline junkie, and then trying to do some good in the world. And I point to some things. I've been involved in Middle East peace negotiations. I've helped settle a war in Cambodia. I help out a lot in environmental battles in the Pacific Northwest, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel pretty good about my life the last 40 years, and I keep looking to do more of it.
I mean, geez, we need a time out here, John. I mean, I've said maybe 10 words and mean absolutely nothing so far in this podcast, except for introduction. That is a hell of a life that you've lived, John. I'm still
Well,
I'm still on the first story. I'm still trying to dissect that one.
I know. Hey, by the way, let me flag a book here. I wrote a memoir too in all those books called Quest, Quest, Risk, Adventure, and the Search for Meaning, which kind of encapsulates all of this. It was a damn hard book to write because it's a memoir, and I was determined that every page would be absolutely the truth. So when I tell the story of especially the first part of my life, I'm so honest about it. There were times when I would just break down in tears and couldn't write for a couple of weeks because it was so damn painful to revive some of those memories.
You know, I was just going to say at the end of this, like, have you written a book? You should write a book. You should even do your own podcast, and just be about stages of your life. It's amazing what you've done so far. And again, we've only been speaking for 20 minutes, and I'm sure you have just condensed all of that into little stages. And I'd love to pick that apart.
Well, go ahead. I mean, I don't know what I forget the time schedule for this podcast, but the thing is, I want to make very clear that I'm not on your show or anybody else's show just because I know my stories are great. I know they're great stories. That's not the point. The point is that I tend not to preach to the converted. I don't see the point. I'm preaching to people who are undecided about where their lives are going, or they've taken some decisions that probably will get them into trouble. For example, focusing their life on gaining money and power, for example, which I'm certain now, having watched a lot of life, don't bring you the kind of satisfaction and meaning that really counts. So I'm looking to use my stories, my biography, as, I don't know what to call it, a prop? No, that's not right. I mean, as a way of getting to people who might not otherwise listen to me because I'm not in the business world. I'm not anymore in the scientific world. I'm not, but telling these stories, whether it's to 12 people in a C-suite in a corporate boardroom, or talking to 4,000 people in a hotel ballroom, I use my stories to get people's attention. And then when they realize that I've done more tough, difficult, and maybe courageous things than the whole room of them have thought of doing, they lean forward and think, oh, this guy's kind of interesting. And then toward the end of my talk, or the time I've got, I will then pivot and say, I discovered that adventuring sure as hell is important. I love adventures. I still do. But I found out that the biggest adventures in life aren't hanging from a rope or dodging a bullet. The biggest adventures of life are finding the meaning of your life, because it's a damn difficult task. The biggest adventures of your life are, for want of a better word, adventures of the spirit, not adventures of the body, of looking around and figuring out when you, for example, look at a mirror in the morning and you see something looking back at you, to know that what you're about to do that day, you're not just marking time. You're not just taking up space on the planet. You got something to do. You got something to do. Every one of us wants to find a meaning to our life. I thought the meaning of my life was wild-ass adventuring, and it proved very destructive. I have a lot of friends now that are convinced that the meaning of their life comes from amassing a lot of money and power. Well, maybe it will. It does for a while, but I'm convinced that the strongest, surest, most steady source of meaning, which is so important, is some kind of service, some kind of giving back. Well, that doesn't mean becoming a Mother Teresa. It doesn't mean dropping your job on a corporate board and taking on sackcloth and ashes. You can, for example, in the business world, you can be of tremendous service, making a good product, selling it for a fair price under fair labor conditions, and mindful of the environment, and being a good neighbor in the communities where your business operates. I mean, that's a service. People in the healthcare, including the people watching this in the veterinary medicine. I mean, I can imagine, saving the life of some kid's treasured pet. I mean, the sense of satisfaction must be enormous, and that's a real
Yeah,
service.
I mean, to your point, most of the veterinarians that I was talking to today, they are that person in their community. They are that neighbor that people see. They're just like you and me. We're human, and we work in our community, and we provide a level of service for our community. And it's a good segue to talk about the price points, providing a service or a product for a price point where it's affordable and good working conditions. We are at a point in our industry, I would say, that it's getting tougher. The price of vet med care is getting too extreme, to the point where some people are, if not already, priced themselves out of care. And that's unfortunate. And we need to we are already, I should say, looking at things called spectrum of care, finding out, should we, and is it possible to do certain treatments, medication that a client can afford? At the same time, have the business continue to make profit to pay the team what they're worth. And it's a fine balance that we all still try to navigate, even to this day. But it's a tough conversation at this current moment. In current economy, everyone is in whatever industry people are in, we're all finding it difficult.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. I'm absolutely sure you are. And I think those in your profession that are only about making sure their third quarter earnings are better than the second quarter earnings are even more frustrated. I suspect those that are really devoting their profession to service, toward saving a treasured pet instead of having to put it to sleep because their medicines are too damn expensive, or the care is too expensive, or the other things that you mentioned. I mean, they find real meaning in that. And all I can say to those people in your profession is hooray. I mean, keep it up. It's a real service you're performing, because you're making life better for everyone who is an owner of one of the treasured pets that they bring to you for care.
Awesome. So, John, let me ask some questions. I mean, you've done a lot and obviously so much in your life and experienced a lot. When it comes to leadership and negotiations, you've obviously had some difficult conversations during your time in the United Nations. What advice would you give to our audience?
Wow. I think the first thing would be to go back on something we've been talking about earlier in this broadcast, and that is to make sure you know what you're doing while you're in the room, what the purpose is. That always helps, because it gives you sort of a backbone. Like, I'm negotiating with this fellow over this matter because it's really important. And if we do this correctly, many people will benefit. The second point I want to make is that when you're in a negotiation, you should always have a very clear vision of what it is that makes that negotiation successful for you.
So you need to end goal is.
And well, it's more than just a goal. This is more than just transactional. When I tell people to create a vision, I'm not just saying create a goal, like we're going to negotiate the prices or the price for 30,000 automobiles. It's kind of like looking ahead for an appropriate time frame. It might be 10 years negotiating building a new highway. It could be 6 months if it's something in your family. But look ahead to the outside time frame and create a picture. A vision is a very clear, concrete picture of the results that you want. When you think you have a clear picture, go back over it again. Put yourself out there. Let's say, for example, that you're negotiating a new product line. It'll take 5 years to bring this product online. Look ahead 5 years. What does the product look like? What are people saying about it? What are the people making the product saying about it? The people that use it, how are they reacting to the product? Put yourself out, completely creating an alternative reality for you in a way. It's more than just a wish. And then when you have a pretty clear picture of what that product looks like in 5 years, then say, okay, if that's true, then in 2 years, what does it look like? Then, okay, in 1 year, what does it look like? Then finally, okay, what does it look like next week? So I call this back planning in a negotiation, looking way out to the outer rim of possibilities and then planning step by step further back until you're back to the reality.
What kind of leadership did you have, and what would you change if you did it all over again?
I think if I had to do it again, I would recognize who I was. I think in the beginning of my first half of my life, I assumed leadership positions as I grew up. In Vietnam, for example, I ran teams of people. I ran teams of people at the United Nations. In the early days, I think I was too formulaic. There wasn't enough heart in what I did because there wasn't enough heart in anything I did. I made the point earlier that it was kind of like rather nailed a piece of plywood over my heart in terms of my reactions with other people. I thought I needed to be big and tough. I was John Wayne, right? Well, I learned that John Wayne isn't a very good negotiator. You need to develop real connections with people. You need to be capable of genuine compassion, understanding, and that's what builds trust. And out of that trust comes genuine solutions. Otherwise, you may win a round because you might end up being smarter and tougher than the other person, but it's a transactional sort of thing. And when your back is turned, they'll come back and get you. Much better building trust and looking at people with compassion, with understanding, and listening to them. I didn't do enough of that. I think when I got to the United Nations, I'd learned my lesson. And the teams I ran at the UN, helping end apartheid, for example, were teams I built because I really built a whole lot of trust in the people working for me. And I actually built a whole lot of trust in some of my adversaries as well. So we could move through conflict more easily than if my reactions had been completely transactional. You do this for me, I do this for you. That's never a good solution, in my view. And despite the fact that the current president of the United States thinks it's wonderful, it isn't.
Right, got you. So I'm going to ask you this question. You've been in leadership for quite some time. You even write books about it. In your opinion, how do you build leaders? And then tell me, how do you teach leadership?
Well, I think leadership is one of those things where half, maybe 2/3, 3/4 of it is on the job training. You can listen to someone like me prattle about, for example, the need to be compassionate, the need to build trust, how to build a vision. These are all good things, and there are books about this. I've written some myself, as you pointed out. This is all still basically theory, and you need to get out there and start leading. And you start at a place where your mistakes are not going to kill you. You start by looking at the simplest kinds of leadership that you're being called to do. It might be, for example, on a family vacation where you and your partner have to work together for the family's well-being. It may be in your second job, you're leading a small team of 3 people and trying to meet a sales quota. Well, fine. Try different things, but be mindful of building trust in the people that you're leading. And you're going to take some pratfalls, but if you're leading a team of 3 people, the pratfalls can be repaired. But basically, on the job training, there's no other way around it. Almost any book on leadership will give you tips on how to build a team, how to establish the communications. But what separates good leadership from not so good leadership are the things that aren't technical, like building trust. I remember some of my early leadership were leading teams of environmentalists out in the Pacific Northwest. The negotiations and the leaderships were tough because you got angry at some of these people. Well, you had to stuff that. I'd make a point of going over and asking one of my opponents if he wanted a cup of coffee. I'd go over and get a couple of cups and not smarmy. I really wanted to talk to this guy. I knew we were on opposite sides, but he's a human being too. Probably just as concerned about succeeding as I am. So, leadership is both hard and soft. The hard stuff, that's pretty easy to find, communication, social media, etc. But the soft stuff is key, and that's building trust. And that means really digging deep into yourself to fuse your own anger, draw out real compassion so that you understand the opponents on your own team. It means remembering people's birthdays. or someone's kid just had an appendectomy and offer time off. Just care for people. That's what people are looking for. They want you to be tough and smart, but at the same time, they want to trust you. Trust is that you're basically a good person and you have their interests at heart.
So trust, inspire, and empathy.
Yes, that's right. This is the most practical kind of leadership, putting a lot of emphasis on building trust, acting with integrity, and acting with real caring with people, including people that you're up against, and not just members of your own team, is an extremely important way to move toward the goals you've set as a leader.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, let's start to wrap this up. So given the life that you've led, what would have been your proudest moment?
My proudest moment. Wow. I suppose helping end apartheid was the biggest thing that I've done, making a global impact by using my own principles of building trust and being compassionate, being tough and caring at the same time. Other work that I did at the United Nations, I could easily have lost my job in Vietnam when it became apparent the war was lost. I did some very brave things, sending private messages out of Vietnam to policymakers in Washington, D.C., saying that basically the war was lost and we got to get the hell out of here. We're just going to kill more of our people. And this is at a time when the White House, of course, Nixon and Kissinger were saying that the war was won, there was light at the end of the tunnel. I argued that there wasn't any light at the end of the tunnel, and I kept at it. I ended up supporting my career rather than the opposite. Because when I got back and when the war turned out to be the debacle that everybody over there knew that it was, that people like me who were blowing the whistle early on were kind of like heroes, risking my own job to do the right thing.
Let's pick it. That's Gab. What is the biggest regret?
I suppose the biggest regret was not realizing early on that while being tough and smart was important, and it was important to my success and anybody else, pushing it too far, seeing that my entire life was to become another John Wayne, and not realizing the dangers of that. That's fine when you're 19, you're still a kid, right? And so you can be forgiven. But I was in my late 20s in that battle in Vietnam, and I was still acting that way. I hadn't woken up. And at that point, I wasn't a kid anymore. I had real responsibilities and powers because people were living and dying with the decisions I was making. I didn't give a damn. And that failure, that realization that my life had become that shallow, was the lowest point of my life. I thought I was a monster. I wasn't sure I could save myself. So yeah, it took me a while to crawl out of that hole.
Right. Okay. Would be your piece of advice or golden nugget, we would say? I mean, let me ask you, do you know the meaning of life yet?
The biggest thing you've got to do in this life is find a purpose. Look in that mirror, and whoever looks back, that person is wanting to make a difference, not just taking up space to find out what that meaning is, what that purpose is. It took me a long time. I thought meaning came from adrenaline rushes. I was wrong. Other people think meaning comes from money and power. I think they're wrong too. Real meaning comes from service, some kind of giving back. That's where real satisfaction comes from. Look up at a starry sky, take a walk and reflect on whether what you're doing is moving you toward a satisfaction based on service. If you haven't found it, keep looking.
So purpose and meaning.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Purpose.
John, thank you so much for coming back on. Thank you so much for coming on. We've had some issues recording it, so we had to redo this again. Give me all the links for your book so we can put them in the show notes. I would love for people to connect with you. Thank you again. Thank you so much, John. Really loved the stories. Fantastic. And thanks for joining us today. That's all we have time for. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have a story that you would love to share and want to come on the show, drop me an email, reese@ivmsolutions.org. This podcast was brought to you by IVMS, Innovative Veterinary Management Solutions. If you are tired of being a business operator and want to be a business owner, then give me a call. If you've heard of systems like Traction, EOS, Lean, 4DX, and other similar systems. They're all great systems, but none are vet specific. I have taken the best of every system, rebuilt them using our industry KPI standards and your practice core metrics, because every practice is different. I will bring your vision to life, get your team bought in and aligned to your long-term goals. I will systemize your practice so you can have more time doing what you love to do. Stop having people rely on you. Practice ownership should not be this hard. Let's move from being a business operator and move into the business owner category. If this interests you, go to my website, www.ivmsolutions.org. Until next time, take care.